Hi there. My name is Ginny Fairchild, and I am a violinist with the Atlanta Opera. And this evening, I'm going to run through the 2021 All-State excerpts for the 9-10 orchestra, 9th and 10th grade. I would have done it earlier because I know the auditions are coming up in just a couple of weeks, but I intended to have a good practice because some of these are kind of hard to get in tune and require a little practice. And to be honest, I haven't had any time to practice. I have 3 kids, a toddler and 2 kids in virtual school, so it's just, there's a lot going on. So this evening, my little secret is I'm going to walk you through it and I'm going to play slowly with you so you have something to kind of practice, play along with. But you're not going to find me playing the excerpts straight through because I need to practice more before I'm going to sound good on doing that. So there's my moment of honesty. So let's start with the first excerpt, okay? This is a great piece from St. Paul's Suite, and the same with the next excerpt, number 2. What you need to remember with this is that it really needs to have a dance feel. You need to feel that there's something happening, not square, but it needs to have some life in it. I'm going to put my marked parts in a link in the comments, and so you can see what fingerings and what dynamics and stuff that I have marked in my own part. Take your own fingerings if you want. These are just suggestions, and of course the same with anything I say. I will say that you need to listen to your private teacher and to your school teachers and make sure that you do what they say because they know you better than I do, okay? So, starting out, make sure you start piano. You want to really do this crescendo. Okay? Don't make it a sort of crescendo. This goes from piano to triple forte. If you don't do the dynamics, if I were a judge, I would immediately mark you off on this one. So start at the tip, vibrate, bigger bows, heavier bows. All right? Now, this part here, you'll notice I was a little lower in the bow. It gives it kind of a feel of being off the string. It makes the stick bounce just a little bit, but the hair is not coming off the string. If you're higher in the bow, it has a real scrubby sound to it, and that's not so much fun. Remember, this is still has the dance feel. So even though it's super loud, be right here in the bow, about a third of the way up your bow, okay? Don't come off the string, just let the stick bounce a little bit. Now, as far as fingerings go for this, the beginning of each measure, I play with third finger. Until here, fourth finger. All right. The reason I do this fingering is because it helps avoid a lot of unnecessary string changes. String changes can make something really, really uneven. And at this speed, it's very hard to line up your string change and your fingers and your bow. I also find that in its sequences, and this is a sequence, right? It starts F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B. It's the same thing over and over, just a step higher. I like to have similar fingerings in my sequence. It helps my brain kind of keep things separated. The key to having good intonation in this is knowing your finger pattern. Some of you might know what I'm talking about with finger pattern, but it means like, is this your finger pattern? Got a little Star Trek going on. Is this your finger pattern? Is it this? Is it this? For this passage, we're not using our fourth fingers, we're using our first three fingers. So you want to know where your half steps and whole steps are. So for example, this first a full measure of eighth notes, my finger pattern is this. The next measure, it's this. The beginning of the next line, it's all whole steps. Then it's this. The measure starting with the C sharp, it's that. If you go through and just mark to yourself where the whole steps and half steps are, you're going to have better luck getting your intonation really nice. If you're just kind of aiming and hoping that it's in tune, is not going to be. So really pay attention to your finger pattern. The other thing you want to know in this, if you choose to use my fingering, which I think is the best fingering, is how far are you shifting each time? So let's look at the first note of each measure. We start on a F sharp, and then we go to a G sharp, and then an A sharp, and then a B. Okay? We can also figure out how far we're shifting by thinking about our first finger. I actually think this is a better way to get good intonation. Our first finger's on a D sharp. Now, the next first finger is on an E sharp, which is a whole step. The next finger is on an F sharp, which is a half step apart. The next finger goes up to a G sharp, which is a whole step above the A sharp. So really, you're thinking... I'm thinking about my first finger. Okay? And you don't even have to pick your first finger up. You can leave it down as you move up the string. Okay. Last thing I want to say about this eighth note section is that how good your intonation is in this, how clear this section is, I think is really going to be a primary measure of what kind of grade your judges give you on this music. So really be careful of intonation. We'll talk about intonation again in that third excerpt, which the Swan Lake, which is also a tough little intonation tune. But I have a rule that my students always know. It's a mantra, and it's actually posted on the wall behind the camera. And it says, for good intonation, think of your sharps, sharper, your flats, flatter, half steps, tighter, and whole steps, wider. All right? One more time, because this is like the center of my teaching in intonation. Half steps, tighter, whole steps, wider, sharps, sharper, flats, flatter. So when you're practicing this, really think about those tight half steps and those wide whole steps. That's going to help you get better in tune. Also, practicing in rhythms is really helpful. That's one rhythm. Or that's another one. There are endless possibilities, probably 100 different variations that would help you. But I'll give you a couple of more examples. I like that one because it makes you shift quickly. So it helps you get more in tune. Now you can also change the bowing. Which makes the whole passage harder. So if you can play it in tune with a slurred bowing, then when you go back to the separate bowing, it'll make it easier. The idea with rhythms is to just change it up some and make your brain have to get your fingers in tune even when it's doing a rhythm. So when you go back to just straight, then it just seems easy because you've already practiced something that's harder. I hope that makes sense to you guys. All right, moving on from this little section here. When you get to the end of this run, it's triple forte, yes, but it just can't be triple forte the whole time, just like a herd of bulls running through the streets of town. It still has to have direction. So what do we do to give it direction when we're already playing supposedly as loud as we can? My suggestion would be to give a little bit of an emphasis on the downbeat of each bar, not an accent, but just a little yigga-da-dugga-da, gives it a little bit more life and helps you keep a sense of rhythm more than dugga-da-dugga-da-dugga-da-dugga-da-dugga-da-dugga-da-dugga-da. All right, that doesn't help you keep a sense of tempo. Now, something that will also help phrasing is the last bar or two of this eighth note passage. Do a crescendo. It's really going to help musically speaking. So how do you make a crescendo when you're already supposed to be playing as loud as you can? Well, one of the things that we professionals do, it's kind of a secret, and we do it in orchestra and we do it in solo playing, is before you need to make a crescendo, back off a little bit. Back off in dynamic just a little bit. Not really obvious, but back off enough so that you have room to crescendo again. It just gives the music a lot better flow and motion and direction. So for example, if I start on the third line, let me start before that. Okay? I don't know if you could hear it, but I backed off just a little bit and then crescendoed in that last bar. Okay? Now, this non-legato part here. This is really going to test the skills of how straight your bow is. If your bow is not straight, if you're going over the fingerboard, then you're not going to make a good sound. And if you're going to get out of control because your bow isn't straight, then your brain is going to try to control your bow. And what your brain is going to make your bow do is use smaller bows. If you use smaller bows like that, you can play just fine, but it sounds boring. It has no dance or liveliness or energy in it. So you need to play as much bow as you can here. As I tell my students, find your threshold. In other words, the most bow you can use before you feel like you're going to lose control, and then push it a step farther. Lose control with your bow. Really move that bow as much as you can. This is not about pressing on the string to make sound. This is about moving the bow to let the sound just come out of your instrument and into the audience or into the videotape. Move the bow. I cannot stress that enough. Don't do that. Isn't it so much more interesting when I'm using more bow? I know you're all saying yes. All right, last thing I'm going to say about this excerpt is here, the non-legato. Non-legato means you put space between all the notes. Okay, that's an absolute. You don't want to sound. You don't want to sound gluey. So instead of thinking of quarter, eighth quarter, eighth quarter, Think eighth note rest, eighth note rest, eighth. So it's eighth rest, eighth rest, 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 rest. All right, you get my point. You'll notice that in this piece, even though this is an orchestral piece, and in orchestras we do divisi, we play the top or the bottom note in a double stop, we don't play both. Notice that I am playing the double stop in this piece because it has a kind of almost an English or Irish fiddle tune feel to it. And so I think of, ooh, excuse me, I need a straight bow. This is a place where I would play the double stop. You don't have to, you can play just the top. But if you want to add a little flavor and sound a little bit better, play the double stop. Make sure you play it in tune, however. Okay, I think that is it for now. Oh, there's one last thing I definitely want to mention. Let me get my metronome out. I hope that you guys, generally speaking, are practicing with the metronome 50 to 70% of all of your practice. I am never very far without my metronome. I have a standard Seiko Quartz metronome. I also use the TE Tuner app on my phone, which I really, really like. But practicing with the metronome, I guarantee you can practice more with the metronome than you're doing right now. Really, really helps. So if we play this at 160 like it's marked, and I can't see very well, that's a lot of metronome. So I would suggest, instead of dotted quarter note equals 160, dotted half note equals 80. And when you get good at that and you're right with the metronome, what would be even better is if you took it down to 40. Okay? And practice until you can be right with the metronome. That's really going to help you get a good, strong inner rhythm. When the metronome is on and it's keeping you honest about your tempo, but it's not on every single beat, then it helps you subdivide better in your head. It just gives you a better sense of tempo. Think of a metronome as just what keeps your is a check that your own inner rhythm is correct, your own inner tempo is correct. Don't rely on the metronome to be your tempo. Let it be your check, all right? Your answer sheet to whether or not your tempo is correct. I'm always a fan of using the metronome very often, and I often put the metronome every other beat or every other bar, or in this case, every 2 bars. Okay. I think that's it for the first excerpt. Let's move on to the second one. Okay, guys, the second excerpt is also from St. Paul's Suite and has a lot of the same feeling as the first excerpt. This is not a terribly difficult excerpt, which means that you have to be perfectly in tune. Don't have good intonation, don't have fine intonation, have terrific intonation. Everybody's going to be getting this excerpt pretty well in tune because it's not that hard to play in tune. First position notes with a couple of extra things out of first position. So your intonation has to be really spectacular. I was just saying in the first excerpt about having your metronome in bigger beats and not every single beat. So I would put the metronome on 36. Or I guess 72 is a good start. You could also put it on 40 or 80. A dotted quarter note equals 154 is very close to a dotted quarter note equals 160, which is the same metronome marking as the first excerpt. You can do it, the same tempo. So the metronome is on 72. That means it's every beat. Okay? The first thing I'm going to say about this excerpt is that I want you to lean on every other bar. Okay? In other words, all right? If you lean on every bar, it just gets old. It doesn't flow. But it needs a lean because it is a dance, right? This is very much a dance. I can't really play it without, feeling a little bit like I want to, kick up my heels. So lean on every other bar. That means you're going to lean on the measure with box 2, and then so on and so forth. You get the point. And if you are confused, I have marked little lines over the bars that you should lean on in my part, which is in the a link to it is in the comment section. Let's see. Just like the first excerpt, I also suggest you move your bow. Really, really important to move your bow. If you don't, and I'm going to play with the metronome just to make sure I'm right in tempo. Here's the difference. First, I'm going to give you the not moving your bow, keeping it comfortable, keeping it in control where you're good at it and it doesn't feel like you're going to drop your bow or let it fly off into the other room. Okay? Fine. Nothing wrong with that. But if I use more bow and give it life and energy, all right, do you hear how it's so much more, it's just more interesting. And in the end, that's the point of music. The point of music is not to be boring, ever. Music is always telling a story, even if it's a scale. Tell a story with it. That is the entire point. We are giving people an emotion. We are expressing something. So express. And the way you can do that here is moving the bow. Okay, 2 other things to add to this, and then we'll move on. Do not forget that there is a diminuendo in the second phrase. This excerpt is basically 2 phrases repeated, right? 2 melodies repeated. The second one is a diminuendo all the way to square 3. So in the beginning you have forte, and then a slow diminuendo, and you really should fade out to almost nothing at 3. And remember, exaggerate your dynamics. Exaggerate. If you think you're playing loud to soft, do it even more. Because in an audition tape or in a live audition, it doesn't reflect out in the audience unless you really, really exaggerate it. So, first phrase, nice and forte. Second phrase, diminuendo. Lean on every other beat. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take my metronome down to 40. It doesn't go any lower than that. And then I'm going to use as much bow as I can. I should practice this so I can have a bigger bow, but I have not been practicing a lot lately, and so I'm not at my finest violin playing, so I don't have the bow control that I do when I'm practicing all the time, to be honest. Okay, I'm subdividing in my head before I start. All right, did you hear me back off in dynamic? I also noticed that I wasn't exactly with the metronome. I was getting a little behind it. So were I to be taking this audition in a couple of weeks, I would practice with the metronome at 80 and really make sure I'm right with it. And then I would practice it many, many, many times at 40 to make sure I am super strong and have a really good sense of inner rhythm. Lastly, whether or not to use 4th finger or open E's on this. Everybody's going to have a little bit of different opinion. Nobody's opinion is wrong. It's just the way they interpret music. Music does not have a right or wrong. It's just your version of it. So I like to do a mix of fourth fingers and open E's because I want to vibrate on some of them. And then you'll notice that I have open E's on some of them too, because that seems very weird in the second bar of 2, to play a fourth finger and then jump over to the E string during the slur. It's not comfortable for me. So I use a fourth finger when it allows me to stay on the same string in the slur. And I'll use an open E when the other note in the slur is on the E string. Okay? I think that pretty much covers everything that I would teach my students about this. So, on to excerpt 3. Okay, excerpt 3. I think we all know that this is the hardest one as far as the intonation, and it's just kind of, it's tough. Be sure to check out my fingerings and my part is in the comment box below. You can click on that. You'll notice for some things I have fingerings above the note and then different fingerings below the note. Those are just 2 options. There are lots of ways you could finger this, and I would go with your private teacher. Okay, make sure that you listen to what your teacher has, and because they know you better than anybody else. And maybe your teacher will have the same fingerings I do. Who knows? So this is the excerpt that I cannot play in tempo without having practiced it, and I haven't had time to practice. So I'm going to play it slowly. But this is also the excerpt where I think it would help to have somebody to play slowly with. I know one of the hardest things about taking virtual lessons right now, and something that breaks my heart in all my teaching over this past year, it's been a year, is that I can't play along with my students. I mean, that is a central part of how I teach and how I express things to my students, is to play along with them. And I can't play along with them, and it's so tough, especially working on intonation. If I just kind of plod along, then it helps my students match me and get in tune. But you and I all know that virtual learning, virtual lessons, you can't do that. So it's really tough. All right. Sorry, I'm getting a text. By the way, that if you see my phone on my stand, it's because the phone is acting as the screen for the camera, so I can make sure that I haven't stepped outside the camera or something. I tend to move around a lot when I play, so I have to make sure I stay in my spot. Okay, much like St. Paul's Suite, the previous 2 excerpts, this still has a feel to it, a dance feel to it, sorry. It's not in 6/8 time, it's in 3/4 time, but it has it 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. You don't want to go 1 2 3 1 2 3. That's not what this music is about. So okay, give it some life, give it a little motion, move your body a little bit. The way I help to give it motion is a little bit of a lean on the first beat of every bar. So almost every bar. In the beginning, it's piano. Don't play piano by playing tiny bows. It's boring. It's just boring. Just like I've said in the previous 2 excerpts, use more bow. We can always use more bow. And the more you use more bow, the more you'll get comfortable using more bow. If you don't use more bow, you'll never get comfortable doing it. So get outside your comfort zone and use more bow whenever you can. So here we want to use more bow, but it's piano. We don't want to be too loud. What do? Here's where I suggest going a little farther over to the fingerboard. Has a little bit of a mysterious sound. I was telling one of my students today that it reminds me of that ride at Disney World, the Haunted Mansion, what is it called? Where you see ghosts dancing around with each other, and I kind of feel like that's a little bit of this, you know. I know it's Swan Lake, I know it has its own narration, but this part reminds me of apparitions dancing a waltz. And so it's kind of mysterious, and it's not completely present. The sound isn't completely there until we get later in this excerpt. Of course, we end double forte at 14. So, in the beginning, you hear me leaning. Now right here, we're starting a long sequence where we're slowly going higher in pitch and we're slowly getting louder. And we want to make this slow crescendo last all the way until 14. So here's a trick that we do in the orchestra world and also in the solo and chamber music world, but especially in the orchestra world. If you have something like this, you see that you have a long crescendo coming up. When you start 2 before 13, which is measure 301, drop down to pianissimo. So you're playing. Okay, so drop down to very, very soft 2 before 13, and then it gives you somewhere to grow at 14. The next trick, and this happens in orchestra all the time, is delay your crescendo. I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've had an orchestra conductor tell my section to cross out the crescendo and move it a couple of bars later. So you'll see in my marked part that at 13 I have crossed out the crescendo and I've instead put a crescendo at 306. I've also crossed out the crescendo at 309 and instead put it at 314. So I'm doing the crescendo, I'm just not allowing myself to get too loud too soon. It's kind of like we're giving away the excitement before we've actually arrived at the pinnacle of it, which is at 14. Okay? So, to put it together, and again, I'm going to play under tempo, okay? Now drop down. Okay? You notice that by 309, I was at mezzo forte. I just didn't get to mezzo forte until 309. I didn't get there too soon because I delayed my crescendo. One last thing I'll say about dynamics in this excerpt before I go through slowly for intonation is at 317. It doesn't say this in the music, but again, another trick of the trade is that at 317 we have the same measures repeated 4 times, right? That little sideways divide sign, 1 bar before square 14, that means repeat the previous measure. So it's 4 bars of this. So if we have 4 bars in a row, it doesn't need to be loud. That's boring and it's not going anywhere. It has no direction. It's not musically interesting. So I would suggest at 317 you drop down a dynamic. You should already be kind of forte by now. What am I? And then you can grow the last 2 bars before 14. So I've marked a mezzo piano at 317. And then a crescendo that lasts from 319 to 320, ending in a double forte at 14. Guys, I cannot stress how important dynamics are. They're not easy to do. You have to work at making dynamics happen. But if you avoid dynamics, you're a boring player. There's really nothing around it. Your intonation can be perfect. You can play fast. You can play all these fancy concertos. You can play anything. But if you don't have dynamics, this is what you're sounding like. You're just sounding like nothing's interesting, and you're talking like this all the time. And you need to have the ups. You need to have the downs. You need to have all the things that dynamics give you. So make sure that dynamics are a priority when you're practicing music. Okay? All right. So you're going to be surprised at something I say, which is move the bow. All right? I told you to move the bow in the beginning. But here in this middle section with all the eighth notes, I also suggest you really move the bow. I don't want to hear... All right? It's boring. When we start thinking about our left hand, this is a really difficult passage. The first thing that happens is we forget to do stuff with our right hand. So just because you have to focus on your left hand, don't let your right hand shut down and get boring. Your right hand, your bow, is what makes all the sound. It makes it interesting. Without the right hand, you're not making any sound. It's not interesting. So this is what makes the music. Don't forget about this. Just because you're obsessed with this, okay? Okay, that's being said, let's talk about the intonation. Okay, my fingerings may look kind of convoluted and hard, and you might initially think, well, I don't want to do these. That's a lot of shifting. It's a lot of craziness. But the reason for my fingerings is that I've avoided a lot of string changes. And I think, as I mentioned earlier in the first excerpt, doing this, string changes are the first thing that makes our rhythm and our tempo get off. And our rhythm and our tempo is so, so important. So give my fingerings a shot. Unless you're really happy with the ones you have, or very happy with the ones your teacher gave you, give my fingerings a shot. I really do think that they'll work for you in the long run when you have to play it faster. You might have fingerings that are easier. I'm all for it. However, once you have to get yet a little really fast, you might find that all the string changes and stuff fall apart and really make it hard to get it up to tempo. So speaking of tempo, all right, this is 72. Okay, I'm not terribly far off the actual tempo, but okay. I believe I said in the first excerpt that I have an intonation mantra for my students and for myself. I think about it all the time. Sharps, sharper, flats, flatter, whole steps, wider, half steps, tighter. Really, really applies here. Especially when you have a half step, make sure that half step is really tight. And then when you have an augmented second, which is where there's a step and a half between notes, really, really wide interval. For example, in 312, the F to the G sharp, that's an augmented second. You want to make sure the F is really low, the G sharp is really high. Measure 314 is another augmented second. Between the G and the A sharp. It happens again in 316. F to G sharp. Okay? Excuse me. I've been talking so much, my mouth's getting a little dry. Let's see, what else can I say about intonation? Oh, you have a lot of octaves here. The end of a lot of the measures. told you I needed to practice. You want to. It's the easiest thing to practice are the octaves. You can tell immediately if they are in tune with each other. So make sure every octave, when you practice your intonation, practice just like I did. Very high G sharp. All right, did you hear me playing a double stop with the octaves to make sure they're in tune? Did you also hear me play double stops with other notes to make sure they match each other? Really great intonation practice. Is to create double stops where you can, to make sure the relationship between your fingers, my third finger, my first finger, are they matching in this key? Okay, let's see. Why don't I go ahead and go through it pretty slowly. Let's start at 13, all right? The couple of bars before that aren't hard. So 13. And just so if you want to play along, I'll give you my A for a minute. Okay, so you can go back in the video and play with the A again to make sure that we're matching, because I wouldn't want you to try to match my intonation if our A's don't match to begin with. Okay, 13. I'm going to do this in 2-bar stints, so it's easier to stop and go back a little bit if you need. All right, 305. Seven. $309. Not very well in tune there. I'm doing it bar by bar now, as you probably noticed. 310. like to say that I was perfectly in tune during that, but I will mention for I think the third time that I too need some practice. But I think my intonation was pretty good, and you can get good practice from that. Okay, let's do it again. No stopping. Let's do straight through. You should be practicing intonation in very small chunks. Do not practice intonation all the way through. Practice it 1 bar at a time, 2 bars at a time, 3 notes at a time, 2 notes at a time. Intonation, your brain cannot remember and store all that information that requires really great intonation from measure 301 all the way to 321. What it needs is repetition of a small amount of information, just like boom, boom, burned in your brain, and then repetition of another small amount of information, boom, burned in your brain. It's just like if you were taking a language class in school, they give you vocabulary every week, and then new vocabulary and new vocabulary. They don't give you an entire French book and have you learn 5,000 words at the same time. So do yourself a good service and make sure that you practice in small chunks. You'll be able to put it together and practice in larger chunks and then have the whole piece. You will learn faster, and it will take less time if you practice in smaller chunks. I know it seems, because I've been there myself, it seems like I don't have the time to practice in those teeny tiny amounts. I just need to get through it. I need to make sure and get everything in tune. I promise you, I have been at this a very long time. I promise you, if you practice in small chunks, then you will get farther faster than if you try to cover everything over and over and over again. Okay? Now that being said, in this video, I'm not going to practice, with you for 3 notes. So I would suggest that you really spend time practicing on your own, and then perhaps play along with this video as a check to make sure you're playing the right notes and that you're playing your notes in tune. Okay? So let's go back to measure 301 and play the whole thing straight through much slower than the full tempo, but faster than I just did. So on and so forth. Okay. If I was scoring myself on my intonation, I'd give myself an 8.5 or 9 on that. I need to get some practicing done because my intonation just really isn't what I want it to be. But it's close for this. And like I said in the very, very beginning of this video, I wish I'd had time to practice recently, but I have a lot of adult responsibilities with a 2-year-old and a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. So there's just been a lot going on. Okay, I think that's it for this excerpt. So let's see. I think that's all that I want to say. Move your bow. Don't forget to move your bow. All right, moving on to the last excerpt. Okay, so here we find ourselves at the last excerpt. This one is decidedly different than the rest. And really, this is about rhythm and some intonation, okay? So, metronome, lots and lots of metronome, okay? Quarter note equals 80. The beginning, C sharps, whatever, vibrate them. I wish that I was playing the end more in tune. This is a good example of where I would play better if I was practicing right now. So I'm sorry that I'm not presenting my best violin self to you right now. However, this is really about like I said, the intonation and the rhythm. So let's address the rhythm first, okay? Let's take it much slower. I'm going to put it at 60. I'm going to start right at 123. 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 4, 1. Okay, so do not rush. We tend to rush. So something like that. Make sure your triplets, yakata dakata dakata dakata, your triplet 16th notes, yakata dakata dakata, are very clear. Your triplet 8th notes, ba 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 ba. Triplet 8th notes are always a little broader than you think they're going to be. We tend to play them more like 16th notes that are like 4 16th notes that are rushed. It just really make sure your triplets fit right into ba 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 ba. Okay? In the second bar of 123, which I guess would be 124, you have triplets and then 16th notes. They are very close in the rhythm, but they are not the same. Make sure 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4. 1 and 2 and 3 E and up. Okay? Make sense? Let me take it even slower. So the rhythm can be super clear. You'll notice, by the way, that I'm playing all of this in 4th position. All this just a whole bunch of E major scales. So I keep my first finger down. I transfer it back and forth from the A to the E string, but I really keep my first finger down as kind of an anchor for the rest of my fingers to make sure they stay in tune. Okay, back to rhythm. 123. 3, 4. 1 E and 2. 4 E and 1 and 2 and 3 E and 4 E and 1 and 3 E and 4 E ba da dum. 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3. Okay? Play along with me a couple of times if the rhythm confuses you. Match me exactly in the rhythm. Not a little off, not a little ahead, not a little behind. Really has to be quite perfect. I'm going to do it one more time at tempo. So I'm not going to play the last part yet, but I'm going to play the beginning. 1, 2, 1, 4, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1. And I apologize that not all my notes are coming out clearly. Again, I need to practice. Also, counting and out loud and playing is a little mind-boggling sometimes. Okay, let's talk intonation. I just practice intonation and double stops, making sure they match, especially your octaves. Very, very good way to practice intonation. You can go up the scale, you can come down the scale, you can go any way you want. But you have to make sure those notes are in tune because those notes happen a dozen times in this piece. A little intonation trick in measure 127. These last 6 notes, that's tough because you have this fifth between the A and the E here, and because it's high up and we're using our pinky finger, it's hard to get it sounding good. Here's the trick. I put down a regular 4th finger, and by the way, you notice I'm holding my 1st finger down the whole time. My 1st finger is an anchor. I play a harmonic on the A, and then a regular note, harmonic, regular note, harmonic. And it makes that A in tune, it makes it easier to play. So practice just over and over, and then get it faster. All right, it really helps. Boy, playing up here is really hard to get in tune, and when I played this excerpt through at the beginning of this recording, you'll notice I did not play it in tune. In order to get really nicely in tune, you need to practice it solidly. I have not done that yet. I know how to get it in tune, however, and that's what I'm going to tell you right now. Up here, your half steps are tighter, are smaller than your fingertips are wide. So I'm going to come way up close to the camera, and I want you to see you can't put a finger, especially that 2nd and 3rd finger, you can't put them right next to each other like this, like you would down in 1st position. You do that way up high, and it's a whole step, it's not a half step. So you really have to tuck one finger under the next. And the same thing on the A string. Really, it's tough. It's very tough. So you just practice over and over. You can practice double stops. Even this high, they're harder to hear, but and then get it faster. Again, I'm leaving my 1st finger down. That's going to guarantee I get better intonation by having an anchor. All right? Even practicing it with you, that 30 seconds, made me play it better in tune. So if I can do it, I know you can do it too. Rhythms always help. Closing your eyes always makes playing the violin feel different, so I like doing that. Make sure that your arm is around, so you're not reaching like this. Bring your arm around so you can really get there. Bring your arm around happens before you start playing the high stop, so bring the arm plenty around. You see that my hand it's almost resting on top of the violin. All right, that's how far around my hand is. Let's see, what else can I offer as far as intonation stuff? I think that's about it in intonation. So let me move on to the very last thing that I'm going to talk to you guys about before this video is finished. and that is how do you make this interesting? You have dynamics, you have some forte, and then you have a crescendo and a double forte, but it doesn't give you a whole lot to hold on to. So, when you're not entirely sure exactly what to do musically, this is an interesting piece. The musical line is not obvious. It's not obvious what to do. Earlier, that's an obvious melody. This is not an obvious melody. So when I don't know what else to do, I grow with the pitch. So my dynamic and my musical line kind of ebb and flow with the pitch. When the pitch goes up, so does my dynamic. When the pitch goes down, so does my dynamic. So for example, I do a little bit of a crescendo at the end of each of these scales. And then in measure 125, I do a hairpin crescendo. To give it a little motion. It's better than, that's boring, but, okay? So when you put it together, listen to my dynamics. Okay? Now this next measure, measure 127, I come down in dynamic a notch so I can crescendo, do the crescendo that's marked. So, and I really delay the crescendo until the last beat. I don't crescendo starting on the third beat, I only crescendo on the fourth beat. Tough little intonation ditty up there. I also do a crescendo in the very last 6 notes of the excerpt in measure 131. You don't want to end. Boy, I'm not steady. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can hear it in my own playing. I hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. Make sure you don't do what I'm doing, okay? Crescendo the last bar, so you end with a bang. So, okay? Man, I really need to practice that. Alrighty, so guys, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, one more thing in here. If we make rhythm mistakes, we tend to make them in the rests. And there's one rest in here which makes a hole that you really can fall in. That's measure 124, okay? I don't know why they put an 8th and 2/16 note rest at the end. They should have just put a quarter note rest. An 8th plus 2/16 notes equals a quarter note. So you have rest, rest. Make sure you don't come in early at 125, okay? Really make sure you subdivide for and a 1, okay? Subdivide, subdivide, subdivide. That's gonna help. Okay, so I'm just gonna do a quick little wrap up here, and that is move your bow. Move your bow past where you are comfortable, and that will get you comfortable. Number 2, practice in small chunks, especially when it comes to intonation. Don't try to get good intonation over a long amount of music. Exaggerate your dynamics. Exaggerate them more than when you think you're exaggerating, then double that. And that's exaggerating your dynamics. I think that's kind of the big takeaways for me for not only these excerpts, but for everything you play. And I imagine for most of you who have private teachers, you probably heard all of those things before. So I'm just another voice that's telling you to do the things that you need to do. So best of luck, guys. Feel free to leave any questions you have in the comments. I know the auditions are coming up in 2 weeks. Yeah, good luck to you all. Bye.